Welcome back. In this final lecture in our crash course section for HTML, we're going to quickly discuss form selections. Basically, we're just going to explore a few more form input types that require some extra element tags. Let's get started. Alright, here we are back in our basic HTML file. I have a form object, and we're just going to cover three types of inputs, extra ones, and those are linking radio buttons, drop-down menus, and text area inputs. So we'll just create an example form for asking if someone owns a dog. I'll create a heading inside of this and say, do you already own a dog? Question mark, save this. I refresh the page and now I see, do you already own a dog? So what I can do is I can have an input type, and the type I can provide is radio. And if you just refresh this, you should now see a little radio button show up. So let's give this some names and values. So we'll say the name of this is dog choice, and the value is yes, and let's connect it to a label. So the label, we'll say, call it yes, and then we'll just give it an ID of yes as well. So that way we can connect this label to this radio button, and we'll say yes, save that, and when I refresh this, I now see, do you already own a dog? Yes, and then the radio button. Okay, so that's a single radio button. Often, however, you'll see multiple radio buttons, and you'll see them connected to each other. So what we can do for that is zoom out a little bit here, and I'm going to copy and paste these values. So I see label again, except this time we'll have this set up for no. So we'll type out, instead of for yes, we'll make this no. We'll make the label no as well, and change the ID to be no. We can still have the same name because we're basically going to connect this radio button to this radio button, so only one of them can be selected, and then we'll change the value to no. Save this, refresh your page, and now you'll notice you have a yes and no radio button. So do you already own a dog? Yes or no? And notice when I click yes, no automatically gets deselected. And the reason that happens is because these two input radio types are connected because they're sharing the same name. If I were to change one of these names, for instance, dog choice 2, save that, refresh, you'll notice that all of a sudden I can actually select both. If I want these to be connected, I should set them up to have the same name, which makes sense because that way when I actually submit the form, I'll just have a name and then the selected value, either yes or no. So we'll save that. And that's the basics of using a radio button. And that's the basics of also linking or connecting to radio buttons. All right, so we already have the already own a dog set up, and then we've linked radio buttons to them. We also have the option of using drop-down menus. So let's come back in here and zoom in a bit. We'll create a paragraph just asking someone, how clean is your house? Let's say from 1 to 3. So let's say 3 is the cleanest. The next type of tag we're going to talk about is the select tag. So the select tag, we can go ahead and not worry about class since that's going to be related to CSS, but we can give it a name. We'll say something like stars for 1 to 3 stars, how clean is the house? And then inside of this, we have option tags. So we'll say option, and then we can give a value here. So our internal value will be great, and we'll say 3 as the option that the user sees. So I will copy this 2 more times, and we'll say this next one is good at level 2, and then we'll say this last one is just bad, so it's not a very clean house at 1. So let's save that and refresh, and now I see how clean is your house. That's that paragraph tag we have here, and then we have this selection with various options, and this is a drop-down menu. So I can say 3, 2, or 1. And what happens is the viewer of your website is going to see what's in between these option tags, 3, 2, or 1. But when you actually submit this form, you're going to connect this name to whatever value was chosen. Just as we saw in the last lecture inside of that URL where we said the name is equal to some value. In the same way that when you submit this form, you'll have dog choice connected to either yes or no. You'll have name stars connected to either great, good, or bad. and this is how you can create a drop-down menu inside your form. Lastly, we can show you how to create a text area. So I'll say any other comments inside of my form, and then we'll say text area. And here we can give it a name, we can give it a number of rows, a number of columns. That basically defines how large the text area box should appear. So if we save that and refresh, then I get to see this text area box show up. And in fact, we can expand this so I can see that this is essentially just a large text box. And if we want it to be smaller, all we need to do is release or reduce the number of columns. So for instance, I want 30 columns, maybe by 4 rows, save those changes, refresh, and now you'll get a much smaller box to begin with. Keep in mind, most browsers allow the user to automatically resize that text area. Once that's all done, you can just have an input button at the end for submit type. Save that, and then we should give it a value, something like submit feedback. Save it, refresh, and now I see any other comments, submit feedback. All right, let's finish off this lecture by actually submitting our form. I'm going to expand my window here a bit. We're just going to provide some general values. Do you already own a dog? I'll say yes. How clean is your house? I'll say 2. And then any other comments, I will say none. Keep in mind that right now my form actually doesn't have an action parameter. And that's because we'll fill in that action attribute later. If you don't actually fill it in, what happens is you just end up refreshing that HTML page with the name value pairs. So I have yes, 2, and none. I'll hit submit feedback. And now I get to see the name value pairs up here in my URL from the get method. It says dog choice is equal to yes, stars is equal to good, and name is equal to none. Keep in mind, it says stars is equal to good because that's the name value pair I chose back in the form. So even though the user gets to see these 3, 2, 1s, if you come back down here and take a look at the options, 3, 2, 1, that's what the user sees. In the back end, you're only dealing with name and value pairs. Okay, so that's it for those extra form selection types. We won't be using them too often, but you should be aware of them, and you can check out the documentation links from the previous lectures inside those HTML files to explore various other HTML form types. Keep in mind, in the future, we're going to be automating a lot of this through the use of Flask. Thanks, and we'll see you at the next lecture, where we're going to have just a quick final assessment for the HTML crash course.